We're mere 15 minutes away from the 2022 MLB trade deadline, and we are going to count you down to 6 p.m. Eastern as we take you through all of the moves across Major League Baseball, and in particular, those centered around the Baltimore Orioles. Welcome into MASN All Access from the MASN Web Studio. I'm your host, Paul Mancano, joined by my co-host, as always, Brendan Mortensen, to discuss the latest news and notes as teams swap rosters across Major League Baseball. The Orioles so far have already made a couple moves. One yesterday, that was the major move so far. That was the trade of Trey Mancini. They also traded Jorge Lopez, a deal that we will get to in a minute. They also picked up somebody via trade from the Tampa Bay Rays in Brett Phillips. But first, Brendan, let's get to the biggest deal. And that would be Trey Mancini going to the Houston Astros. The 30-year-old, who is an impending free agent, has a mutual option for next season that is probably was going to be unlikely to be picked up by both sides, and it made sense for the Orioles to have to send Mancini out, despite the fact that he has been such a great player and such a great person for the Baltimore community.
Yeah, as you said, Paul, this is seemingly a rental trade, as most around the league believed that Mancini would not be back with the Orioles next season. You mentioned that mutual option for next year. More than likely, that was not going to get picked up. Trey Mancini, of course, has been a fantastic contributor, not only this year for the Baltimore Orioles, but in years past as well. But most around the league also believe that the Orioles got a pretty good haul in return for Trey Mancini. They add 2 prospects to their top 12 in their top 30, according to MLB Pipeline. Their now 8th-ranked prospect, Seth Johnson, has a really exciting fastball. He does need to get Tommy John surgery, but the Orioles probably would not have been able to get him had it not been for that surgery. And then Chase McDermott now becomes the 12th-ranked prospect in the Orioles farm system. Has some command issues so far this season. Hasn't put up the best numbers this year, but still a lot of potential there for McDermott.
Let's take a look at the details of the trade yesterday as Mancini goes to the Houston Astros. Brendan just mentioned those 2 players acquired by the Orioles in the deal, as it was a 3-team trade between the Astros, the Rays, and the Orioles. Seth Johnson comes from Tampa. Chase McDermott comes from Houston. 2 23-year-old right-handed high single-A pitchers that come the Orioles' way. All they sent out was Trey Mancini. He went to the Astros. The Rays received Jose Siri in the deal. So a deal that was benefiting a couple teams that think that they're right in the mix in the American League. The Astros certainly close to the Yankees at the top of the American League, and the Rays are playoff hopefuls once again. While the Orioles hover right around 500, Brendan, trading Trey Mancini certainly hurts in the short term, but the long-term future at first base is very clear, and it's Ryan Mountcastle going forward, in addition to some internal options that they could use as a backup first baseman behind Mountcastle for the 2022 season and maybe beyond.
Yeah, moving on from Trey Mancini here, more than likely opens up some opportunities for some other young, exciting players who aren't quite up at this Orioles roster right now. We could see Kyle Stowers get promoted sometime over the next few weeks. We've seen Yusniel Diaz get the call as well. Maybe Diaz will make his debut here soon. And of course, moving Trey Mancini lets Taron Vavra get into the lineup, whether it be at DH or a corner outfield spot. So it's giving some opportunities to some young and exciting players. And as much as we all loved Trey Mancini, he was not a young player anymore, was the veteran presence in this clubhouse. So Trey Mancini now has an opportunity to go get a ring with the Houston Astros potentially, as the Orioles are still in the mix for this wild card hunt, but more than likely won't be making a World Series push this year.
So the Mancini move happened before yesterday's game, the series opener against the Texas Rangers, which the Orioles won 7-2, and Mike Elias addressed the Mancini trade, acknowledged that it was an emotional one for him and for the entire Orioles organization, but was excited about what the O's are getting back.
When a player is a free agent in 9 weeks, you have to consider opportunities to bring in high upside talent that has the potential to contribute many years down the road. And that's what we see in these 2 pitchers. Seth Johnson in particular from the Rays, we view in the industry is viewed at times as a top 100 talent. And unfortunately is undergoing an injury right now, but I think that's what has made him available. And Chase McDermott is performing very well. as a 4th-round pick from the Astros in IA. He's in a bit of a hitter's environment there in Asheville, but his strikeout numbers, his innings totals, and his stuff point to a lot of future success. So I think we bolstered our pitching depth as an organization, but this is certainly a very difficult move to make. But I think it's one that characterizes our optimism for the future, those next several years. We want to continue building towards that with the high bar that we have to climb. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we can discuss with Trey Mancini as a free agent.
You heard Mike Elias specifically mention Trey Mancini's contract status and the fact that he's likely to be a free agent in a mere 9 weeks. But the Orioles also made a trade today involving a player who is not scheduled to be a free agent for a couple seasons, and that is Jorge Lopez. Brendan, we knew that Trey Mancini was likely to be dealt simply because of his contract status, but the Jorge Lopez deal was a little bit more surprising considering he was under team control for a couple more years.
Yeah, a bit of a surprise, Paul. Jorge Lopez not scheduled to be a free agent until the 2025 season and was having really a career year, a 1.68 ERA, 19 saves on the season. Didn't give up an earned run in the entire month of July. Jorge Lopez really one of the better relievers in all of baseball this season, but relievers can be volatile, and maybe the Orioles just believed that they were maximizing Jorge Lopez's value here with this trade, and maybe they didn't believe that this would be sustainable success moving forward. Either way, the Orioles try to maximize the Lopez value as of right now. And of course, the fact that he has a little bit more team control only adds to that value and the possible return that the O's could have gotten.
And you can make the case that he probably doesn't have as much of a track record as some of the other proven closers that are being dealt around the deadline this year, but his numbers were spectacular this year, and what the Orioles got back was 4 pitching prospects, only one that slots into their top 30. That's left-hander Cade Povich. They also have Yennier Cano, who is 28 years old, has a little bit of major league experience, is the only one of these 4 pitchers with major league experience so far. And then they acquire righty Juan Nunez and lefty Juan Rojas. They also send to the Minnesota Twins cash considerations in addition to Jorge Lopez. So they're going for quantity with this deal. And Brendan, I said earlier when we went live on MASN All Access that the Orioles made a move similar to this a couple off seasons ago when they dealt Dylan Bundy, who was a starter, but they got back 4 pitchers in return. Mike Elias likes to acquire pitching prospects via trade when he takes position players early on in the draft.
Yeah, you're improving your pitching depth here with Cade Povich. He slots into the Orioles' top 30 at number 26, according to MLB Pipeline. Is still at high A right now, but he was a proven college pitcher and could be a fast riser throughout the minor league ranks. Povich has a really good changeup. It's graded as a 55 per MLB Pipeline. Good fastball as well, a fastball that actually surprised some people this season. So Povich, I think, could be a fast riser. Maybe we'll see him at Double-A Bowie sooner rather than later. But as you said, along with Povich, they get some more pitching prospects that are more of lottery tickets. You're not really sure what you get with those other 2 pitching prospects. And then you mentioned Cano. He is 28 years old, but he's almost kind of a young 28 years old. He was signed out of Cuba at the age of 25, so hasn't had a lot of professional coaching in the United States. So now he gets a chance to join this Orioles system that has had a great track record of kind of taking unproven starters or relievers from throughout the league, whether they were DFA'd or just flat out released, and turning them into quality players. That's exactly what we saw with Jorge Lopez, and maybe the Orioles can do something similar with Cano, who has shown flashes of excellence with his stuff, even though the command isn't really there, still has a 45% chase rate at the majors, and that's certainly intriguing.
The Orioles have already done that with several relievers that you mentioned. CNL Perez, who was picked up off of waivers in the offseason. They picked up Jorge Lopez off of waivers back in 2020 from Kansas City, turned him obviously into an all-star reliever. Felix Bautista, who not much was thought of, was added to the 40-man roster this past offseason. And Brendan, I tend to think Bautista is going to slide right in as the Orioles closer with the loss of Jorge Lopez.
Yeah, reporters were talking with Felix Bautista today. He said that it would be a dream come true to be a closer at the big league level. Maybe that dream is coming true here with the Orioles as Jorge Lopez gets dealt to the Twins. Felix Bautista might slide pretty naturally into that ninth inning. Actually has a better ERA on the year than Lopez does so far. Obviously has not been in as many high leverage situations as Lopez, but Bautista has shown a ton of potential, looks flat out unhittable at points so far this year, so I think he becomes the Orioles closer.
Did pick up a save a couple days ago, so Brandon Hyde's not afraid to throw him in those kind of situations. We could see if the Orioles are in a close game tonight, the second game of this series in Texas, if Felix Bautista is called upon once again out of the bullpen. Well, we're just 4 minutes away from 6 p.m. Eastern Time, which is the mark of the MLB trade deadline. What do the Orioles have left to do in these final 4 minutes? Well, Mike Elias often likes to take things down to the wire, as he did in 2021 when he dealt Freddie Galvis to the Phillies. That was a move that wasn't reported until after the trade deadline itself. Let's take a look back at how last year's trade deadline went down for the Baltimore Orioles. Welcome into MASN All Access as we are taking you live up until the 4 p.m. Eastern Time MLB trade deadline.
The Orioles, perhaps a little bit surprisingly, have stayed pretty quiet so far.
Said leading into this deadline, we were very mindful of the fact that a lot of our best players that were in demand are players that are not pending free agents with the Orioles, and they're players that are young and talented and we like, and that have future years with this club.
Yeah, really the only starting pitcher at this point that could get moved is John Means, and we've heard so much about how the Orioles like him. He's obviously younger, and he's the ace of this rotation at this point. I think it would take a massive deal for somebody to pry Means away from the O's.
And ultimately we made 2 trades today.
They did trade a pitcher earlier today, a reliever in fact, albeit not one that was on the 40-man roster coming into today. That would be Shawn Armstrong being dealt to the Tampa Bay Rays. Armstrong turns 31 in September, so there was little chance he'd be around long term. And in exchange, all the Orioles get is some cash considerations, but that can be useful, as we've seen.
And then at the very last minute, trading Freddie Galvis, who was nearing return to play from his quad strain.
We didn't think he might be moved just because of that injury status, but according to John Heyman, Freddie Galvis is on the move back to his old club, the Philadelphia Phillies.
Well, it's interesting. Freddie Galvis is somebody that we talked about leading up to that injury that fit the mold of the guy that Mike Elias would move at the deadline. He's an established veteran playing a premium position.
We got a very nice-looking minor league pitcher in Tyler Birch. Put up superlative numbers. He had a big stuff jump.
And he is just 23 years old. He's a 6'2", 190-pound right-handed pitcher.
A nice arm for the system, especially considering we only had a couple of months left with Freddie Galvis.
The Orioles probably don't have a ton of use for Freddie Galvis at this point, so why not take a shot on a minor league pitcher who, like you said, with those 15 strikeouts per 9 for a 23-year-old pitcher, it's worth the shot.
Well, a fascinating trade deadline around the sport of baseball, and the Orioles just couldn't help themselves. They get into the fray as well, dealing Freddie Galvis back to the Philadelphia Phillies. So Freddie Galvis was not expected to be dealt last year because of his injury status, but he ends up getting traded. My question for you, Brendan, is are there any dark horse candidates that you think the Orioles could trade in the final minute or so before the trade deadline that maybe we weren't expecting coming into today?
Well, there's not a ton of time left if the Orioles are going to make a trade. One name that we've talked about a lot that hasn't seemed to have gotten a lot of traction over the last few hours is Anthony Santander. Maybe the Orioles just view that Trey Mancini trade as an opportunity to shift Santander into the DH role. You could call up Kyle Stowers to be an everyday starter. You could get Yusniel Diaz and Ryan McKenna some more playing time, maybe Tyler Nevin as well. So maybe the Orioles just view that as getting some other guys playing time, but keeping Santander in the middle of that lineup as he continues to have a career year. Maybe some bullpen names could be on the move as well, maybe a Dylan Tate. I don't think the Orioles would move a Felix Bautista or a Cionel Perez, or maybe Jordan Lyles if a contending team just needs a number 4 or number 5 starter to eat innings at the back end of their rotation. But if the Orioles are going to make another deal, they need to do it pretty quickly.
Yeah, Jordan Lyles is on a deal that can be expiring if the team that acquires him or the Orioles choose not to pick up his $11 million option for 2023. So that could be attractive for a team that's looking for a starter. We have now passed 6 o'clock on the Eastern Shore, which means that the Orioles have no more time to make moves, but that doesn't mean that we are done with getting news in, because as mentioned, a lot of news comes in after the 6 p.m. deadline. So we will stay with you live on MASN All Access as we wait to see if any more moves come in under the buzzer. But Brendan, you mentioned some of the guys that could be dealt. How about somebody who was acquired by the Orioles? That's Brett Phillips, who is added to the Orioles outfield mix, can play center, one of the faster guys in baseball, and the Orioles had to just send out cash considerations in order to get him. Now, he's not having a great year so far, a 147 batting average, and he was somebody that was on his way to being DFA'd by the Tampa Bay Rays, so they clearly didn't have room for him. He fits right into the Orioles' 40-man roster, but it feels a little bit strange considering they just called Yusniel Diaz up, and you'd think that they would like to give some more playing times to some of their younger outfielders like Diaz or like Kyle Stowers.
Yeah, kind of a curious move here for the Orioles getting Brett Phillips. The outfield seems very crowded, and when we talked about a Trey Mancini trade and a potential Anthony Santander trade, it seemed like the Orioles wanted to make some space in that outfield for younger prospects like Kyle Stowers, Yusniel Diaz, or guys that are already at the major league level like Ryan McKenna or Tyler Nevin. But this Brett Phillips move seems to indicate that they weren't entirely confident in the outfielders that they currently had on the roster. Although, to be fair, I don't think Phillips will get a ton of playing time at the major league level. I would anticipate him being just kind of a defensive replacement where the Orioles need him, and he is a fantastic defensive replacement at that. And he's also a very good locker room presence, which I know isn't the primary reason that you would trade for somebody, but acquiring Brett Phillips still gives you somebody great in the clubhouse when you just lost somebody great in the clubhouse in Trey Mancini.
Let's take a look at the Orioles lineup for tonight. Rock Kabako tweeting just a few moments ago, no more Orioles trades to be done. So it is 6:03 Eastern, and the Orioles have officially completed all of the moves that they are making at this trade deadline, and that means Anthony Santander is in the Orioles lineup at the number 3 spot. They have Mullins at the leadoff spot, Adley at the number 2 spot, Santander in the 3-hole, Mountcastle as your first baseman going forward and your cleanup hitter tonight. Austin Hayes behind him. Rougned Odor sticks with the team through the trade deadline. Ramon Arias stays at third base. Designated hitter for tonight is Terran Vavra. Jorge Mateo is shortstop, not right-handed pitcher. That's my mistake on the graphic. And Jordan Lyles gets the ball tonight. So Lyles does not end up getting dealt at the deadline. Instead is going to start against his former team tonight against the Texas Rangers. So some names in the lineup, Brendan, that we thought could be scratched if the Orioles made a last-minute move, but Santander, Lyles, Odor, all of those guys remain with the Orioles through the trade deadline.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I think once you traded Trey Mancini, you still needed some bats in the middle of the lineup. I know Adley Rutschman has come along really nicely, but Ryan Mountcastle has been struggling a little bit, and Austin Hayes and Cedric Mullins ideally are more top of the lineup guys. So Anthony Santander will probably be a fixture at the number 3 or number 4 spot in the Orioles lineup for the rest of the year. He's somebody who could maybe hit 25 home runs this season if he continues on the pace that he is currently at. So I think it's important that the Orioles held on to Santander. They still have some thump in the middle of that lineup. And again, this isn't a 30-year-old Trey Mancini. This is only a 27-year-old Anthony Santander. Still has some future potential over the next few years as the Orioles look to compete as well.
Let's take a look at some of the moves that are also made around the league today as well. Some earth-shattering moves made around Major League Baseball this afternoon, several within the Orioles division. One that just came across our Twitter feeds is Whit Merrifield heads from the Kansas City Royals to the Toronto Blue Jays. Nationals went ahead and traded their superstar, Juan Soto, along with Josh Bell to the Padres. The Yankees had a busy day. They traded for Frankie Montas yesterday. Mariners yesterday traded for Luis Castillo. Dodgers traded for Joey Gallo this afternoon. Red Sox sent Christian Vasquez to the Astros in a funny moment out in Houston as those two teams were playing. He ended up just switching dugouts shortly before that game started. The Brewers sent their closer, Josh Hader, to the Padres. So the Orioles aren't the only team in a competitive race that sent their closer to another team. Phillies acquired Brandon Marsh. They also just acquired Noah Syndergaard as well. And Eric Hosmer, after opting to use his no trade clause and not go to Washington, ends up going to Boston as part of a separate deal. So plenty of moves being made around Major League Baseball. But Brendan, as mentioned, the Orioles are done making trades, which means that the Trey Mancini trade yesterday and the Jorge Lopez trade this morning are the only two moves that the Orioles make. And in return, they get 6 prospects back. So they keep some major pieces going forward. They send out a couple guys that they did not plan to have in their long-term future. And at the end of the day, they net some more prospects to what is ultimately the #1 farm system in all of baseball.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at the haul as a whole, it's a pretty good return for Jorge Lopez and Trey Mancini. Obviously, you're not giving anything up for Brett Phillips, who was just acquired for cash considerations. But to get Mancini and Lopez, in return for Mancini and Lopez, you get 3 prospects in the top 30 per MLB pipeline, one of which was your number 8 prospect in Seth Johnson, and another one, your number 12 prospect in Chase McDermott. So a lot of potential coming back to the Orioles in these deals.
So those are the deals that are done before the trade deadline, but the Orioles still have a game to play tonight as they take on the Texas Rangers. In the second game of this 3-game series, they can win the series tonight after a 7-2 win yesterday. Coverage starts at 7:30 Eastern. Thanks so much for tuning in to this, commenting along with all of your thoughts on YouTube and on Facebook. We appreciate it. And stay tuned to MASNsports.com, where Steve Molesky and Rock Kabaka will have continued coverage for you as well. At Brendan Morty is Brendan's Twitter handle. Mine is at Paul Mancano. Thanks so much to Tim Leonard for producing this podcast. Producing this show, I should say. We will have a podcast coming to you tomorrow live on these same channels. You can also listen to after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can get the MASN All Access podcast. For Brandon Mortensen, I'm Paul Mancano. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.